With me to talk through the political fallout, Republican pollster Frank Luntz and Democratic strategist and former senior advisor for the Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns, Chuck Rocha. Glad to have you both here. I mean, Chuck, there are some House Democrats that are releasing and have released a letter that is demanding for Trump to drop this pursuit, essentially, and of effort against Khalil. But you know what? Only 14, just 14 Democrats have signed it. Why?
There's a number of reasons. One is that the Jewish lobby is very strong in the Democratic Party and Republican Party, and they don't want to see ads run against them in their own primaries. It's always about politics and money to begin with. Second of all, it's a issue out there in the electorate where folks don't really understand it. They understand that there are illegal, quote unquote, immigrants that we want to get rid of. They understand that there was a disturbance at Columbia. People can't have the time in their day to put those two together. But when Democrats talk about this, they should be talking about the First Amendment. There's lots of things that go on every day that I disagree with, but people have the right. And they have the right to say what they need to say. And I think this is one of the examples that Democrats will use.
What's your perspective on it, Frank?
There's free speech, which is 90% support. There's protest, which about 70% support the right to protest. Then when it comes down to hate, it drops down to 20%. And when it's violence, it's at 10%. Hamas is a violent organization. They preach violence. They killed Israelis by the hundreds, thousands. And the public does not support them. This one individual, we don't know what he did. We know what he said. We know what he argues for. The public simply wants universities to be places of learning. They do not want to take away someone's right to protest. I want to be clear about that. But when the protest crosses over into either hate speech or into calls for violence, in Colombia it was violent. It was awful a year ago. The public would say, enough. Let's get him out, and let's bring peace back to the campus.
And yet, to play devil's advocate, there has been a lot of litigation, including when there has been particularly what we call it hate speech, when the Klan has marched through areas of the country. And normally very liberal organizations have supported their right to do so, almost quoting Voltaire, right? The idea of, I can vehemently oppose what you want, but I'll fight like hell for you to say it. Is the idea of targeting this particular person as opposed to criminal conduct and charges against others who participated, does that suggest this is a pretext or something more?
I think it shows that something could be coming. Let's take you back to January 6th when the president would tell us he had the right to stand there and tell people to go to the Capitol and let their voice be heard. Some could interpret that as violence, but that still was his right, under his right to do that. So you can't have it both ways. You got to pick one side or the other. And people who really care about this in the polling that I do in 20 congressional districts and 3 Senate races that I worked in last year are the ones who already have a Donald Trump flag at their house or on their boat or couldn't find Israel on a map right now. I'm just saying.
So Democrats, though, are they being consistent in the fact that they have been condemning people who have silenced voices before, but only 14 signed on to this letter? I'm not saying that the content of whatever he's accused of having done, which we don't know the specifics of, is something short of egregious, but why don't we hear more from Democrats on this issue?
The reason you see me smiling is because I'm one of those rare people who still run campaigns every day for a living. And there's one thing all Democrats have in common is they're very cautious. It's like they're walking around with nitroglycerin and they don't want to get nowhere near this. And I'll promise you their consultants are saying, you shouldn't be on that letter. You shouldn't be nowhere near this. There's no way good for us here.
Well, Republicans, though, Frank, I mean, you've got most Republican lawmakers who are in lockstep with Trump. We know that. But you also have a few surprising dissenters. And you have people like Ann Coulter, who has asked if the arrest of Khalil has violated the First Amendment. How would this play among, say, Republican voters?
The Republican voters are extremely pro-Trump. And yet it's not about ideology, it's about a personality. It's about the change that he wants to bring to America. And on an issue like this, Republicans don't support violence. They don't support what led to women getting beaten up, what led to Jewish students either coming out of their classrooms and getting accosted or simply staying in their dorms. And that is something, we see it in the reaction. And perhaps it's an overreaction, but it's the reason why the public wanted so much change and why they voted for Donald Trump in the first place. Stability, safety, security. These are common sense issues, not ideological. And those people who voted for Trump don't want the hysteria of Columbia or USC or what happened in other universities, because it's not limited to Columbia. They just want a little bit of peace and quiet. You want to oppose something, go ahead, but not with hate and not with violence.
Well, this is going to be the conundrum because the First Amendment infringements are judged by whether you are judging the content of the speech and the substance of the speech, not just the time or the place or the manner that you do so. More on this ahead.